Today's guest is a former CEO for a large financial company who had an awakening when premonitions led her to a different path. She's now a psychic investigator, an inspirational speaker, and a tutor at the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle Centre in Edinburgh, Scotland. Please give a massive Koit welcome to Ann Treherne. Hi Ann, and welcome to KoitCast.
Thank you for having me.
It's a great pleasure to have you here. It's an honour for me, so thank you for coming. I suppose I will start, like I always do, with the old classic question: who are you, where are you from, etc, etc.
Okay, well, I'm Ann Treherne from Edinburgh, and I suppose a little about my background is I've had a career in financial services. That's the boring part, banks and building societies. And I was quite successful, very successful in that industry, becoming a senior manager. But my life in finance came to a shuddering halt when I received a premonition, a quite dramatic and traumatic premonition, and that caused me to change my life completely. And the short version of that is I became founder of the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle Centre in Edinburgh, which is a spiritual centre for the benefit of the mind, body, spirit. So that's the short intro.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. I was going to ask you about your origin story, if you will. So you've mentioned, obviously, it was a premonition. Could you elaborate on what exactly happened to you?
Yes, sure. I do get emotional every time I mention this, even now, because it was very traumatic, as I mentioned. And my life at that point was hectic. I was a workaholic. As I mentioned, I was pretty successful in my career, and it was a man's world. So as a woman, I had crashed through many glass ceilings to get right to the top. So I was pretty focused on my work. I wasn't at all interested in any of this woo-woo stuff. Any of this psychic stuff was completely alien to me. And then suddenly I started getting flashes of images in my head. Now, I know now because I ended up being a psychical investigator. So I know now that premonitions tend to happen in the hypnagogic or hypnopompic state. So that's the in-between stage of either falling asleep at night or waking up in the morning. And that stage where you're between waking and sleeping is the time where most people encounter premonitions, but that was not the case with me. My premonitions came when I was working, when I was busy, when I was driving my car. And indeed, that first such premonition that I mentioned, this flash, which was of, I would call it a blood and guts image. It was dead bodies and blood over the place. And that flashed into my mind when I was driving the car at speed on the main M8 motorway that links the two main cities of Edinburgh and Glasgow in Scotland. And these flashes of images became more and more frequent and more detailed over several weeks until they seemed to almost merge together, until it was almost like a videotape that was playing in my head, and I could see the whole scene playing out in front of me.
Right, so you had like puzzle pieces over time, and then as time went on, it became a whole movie sort of thing.
That's right, yes. And as well as the whole movie, there was this burning desire to do something or tell someone. It was like a craving. It was like something that I could not cope with. And so I did. One day I was driving into our head office building with this videotape having played in my head again. And I spoke to a colleague, not a friend, just a colleague who just happened to be the first person who I saw when I walked into the building. And I said to her, I need to speak to you confidentially. So I confided in her, and I told her, I remember saying to her, I've been getting these images of a gunman. And I told her there's going to be another Hungerford. Now, I don't know if you remember Hungerford
I do, yep, yep.
Yeah, so that had happened a few years before, where a gunman had casually walked along the streets in Hungerford, shooting people at random. So I said to her, there's going to be another Hungerford, but this time it's going to be in Scotland. And I think if somebody told me that, I would be calling the men in the little white coats to come and take me away. But she took me at my word and asked me lots of questions. And I remember saying to her, I know it's Scotland and not England. I know it's outside and I know it's inside a building and not outside like Hungerford. And I described the building, and I said, I can see this building. It's got lots of windows, and I can see in the building there's lots of people sitting at desks. And I described this man as being like Rambo. Not that he looked like Sylvester Stallone, but he had multiple guns about his person and belts of bullets, and he was casually walking through this building, shooting people. And at the description that I gave her, she decided that it was our head office building and that she should take it upon herself to inform the executive management, the board of directors. Now, my career had been pretty hard fought and won that stage, and I could suddenly see it disappearing over the horizon if she decided she was going to tell the board of directors. And so I swore her to secrecy. I said, I've thought about speaking to the police, but I don't know where it is. I just know it's going to happen in Scotland. I don't know this building, and it's not our head office building. I would recognise this. I don't recognise the building. I don't know where it is. There's nothing I can do. I just needed to tell someone. And I swore her to secrecy, and she went back to her work. I went back to mine. And after that, I felt completely relieved. It was the visions were gone. There was no urgency to do anything, I had done it. And I just promptly forgot about it until a few days later. And I was working in Glasgow. I went back to my car, put the key into the ignition, and the radio burst into life. And that's when I heard it. There's been a shooting in a school in Dunblane, and several casualties, a number dead. And sorry, I'm going to get emotional again. Just
no, I understand.
To mind. But I sat in that car for hours and cried and cried and cried. I couldn't stop my legs shaking long enough to drive the car apart from anything else. And I couldn't understand why I had got all this other information, but not the crucial piece of information that it was a school. And had I known it was a school, perhaps I could have done something about it. And I felt completely responsible and guilty and traumatized by the whole thing. And even now to this day, I can't tell you what happened over the next few days. They are completely gone from my memory. My husband said that he couldn't get any sense out of me. They call it PTSD these days. But I just couldn't believe what had happened. And however, I did have to pick myself up, dust myself down, and walk the talk and be that senior manager that I was, and go back into our head office building the next week, even although I knew I wasn't really functioning at all. And that's when I encountered my colleague, who looked at me again as if I was the devil incarnate, and I didn't realise the impact it had on her until I wrote my first book, which details all of this. And I realised in writing the book that I had put her in the same position as me by sharing the information with her. She must also have felt some responsibility, some guilt that she didn't do anything. And I only found out actually because I had to leave eventually, not immediately, because I was having to find out why all this was going on, but I decided to leave that industry behind and find out exactly what was going on and why, and what were you supposed to do about it? Could you do anything about it? And at the point of leaving, She had actually confided in one of our executive directors. So there was three of us now that carried this secret.
That's an incredible story. And I'm going to ask you a hard question now, but I know you're able to answer it. Do you think if you had found out that it was a school, that you would have taken it further?
Oh, I don't know. I had considered, before speaking to the colleague, I had considered speaking to the police and giving them this information. But my logical mind said, well, not only will they think you're a crank, because the police are not very good at, well, they've, I have to say, but taking like psychic information on board, I just logically didn't have enough information. And even if I had known it was a school, well, how many schools are in Scotland? You know, I didn't know the location of it. So these questions have haunted me since then, all this time. And I say it still has an effect on me, even just bringing back these thoughts to mind.
Sure, I'm sorry that to make you go for, well, not make you go for it, to help bring it back up again. It's a strange one, isn't it? Because why, like you said, you had the why question earlier. Why have the premonition if you couldn't do anything with it other than it to be an awakening for you? That's the only thing I can put it down to. Is that where you've fallen?
It certainly was an awakening, and I think as well, my theory of all this, and it's just that comes from me and my logic trying to piece this together and make some sense out of the whole thing, as well as my psychical research. But I think there's a greater intelligence out there than us that communicates in various ways. And I think quite simply, I was needed to do a job. And I had the right criteria in order to do the job that they wanted me to do, which was set up the Arthur Conan Doyle Centre. But to get my attention, it had to be something pretty dramatic, because I was 100% focused on my job and my career. And so to stop me in my tracks, it had to be something pretty dramatic, and it was. I mean, I think the other thing is there's a catch-22 question here, and in my first book, the foreword is written by Professor Chris Rowe of Northampton University, who studies parapsychology, studies mediumship, and he was talking about if you could have intervened and done something about it, and it didn't happen, then it wasn't a premonition.
Yeah.
Right. So there's that side of things as well. I know in the first book I tell about a second premonition that I had where I did intervene. So the jury's out on that.
I was going to say. Well, I mean, you're right about the police. If you go to them, you're either going to be considered, unless you give details, a kook or a suspect, aren't you?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know the strange thing? Sorry, just a little aside, talking about the police. In setting up the Arthur Conan Doyle Centre and all that has gone around with that, I found myself invited to business meetings, which was me going back to my business background from a spiritual standpoint, which I thought was completely alien, but the book explains how that happened as well. And I found myself invited to the police college in Tullyallen in Scotland, which is the main police training college, and speaking to some of the senior police officers that allowed me to have this discussion with them and about them being more open to receiving information from psychics and mediums. So that came out of it as well.
So there's always positives, always links. I find that with everyone I speak to, a path you go down and it branches out and you end up in the right place for whatever reason. Whether we think it's fate or we decide it, I don't know. But it is something very interesting and a thread I think we need to pull on. When it was happening, did you think you were going mad at that time, or and I'm gonna suffix this as well with, you mentioned the hypnagogic state. Did you also suspect, I mean, I don't know if you knew about that state at that time where you linked it with sleep. So did you think you were having some sort of narcolepsy, that sort of thing, where you were potentially entering a dream state?
Um, you're absolutely right in your conjecture, but that wasn't how it happened with me. So it always happened when I was busy or driving the car or actively engaged in something. So there's no way I was in the hypnagogic or hypnopompic state. And that just seemed odd to me as well. It didn't seem to correlate with what we know of the typical premonitions. But did I think I was going mad? Yes, definitely. I couldn't understand why this had happened and why me and what was I supposed to do, all these sorts of questions. It took me 2 or 3 years because I didn't leave right away. As I said, I was traumatized, but I had to find out. I had to find out why, and could you change the outcome, and what was I supposed to do about it, if anything? So all of these questions, and that caused me to find Professor Archie Roy of Glasgow University, and he was at that time president of the Society for Psychical Research in London, but he had also set up the Scottish Society for Psychical Research in Glasgow. So I found him. I almost tracked him down and got in front of him so that he could help me and help explain it. And that's how I became a psychical investigator in his organisation.
So yeah, one thing leads to another. Now, touching the last question I have about your initiation into this world, so to speak, when you decided to speak to your colleague, obviously that's a brave thing. What compelled you to open up to that person? I mean, most people would keep things to themselves, I would assume. So what compelled you to say something?
I had been keeping it to myself, and the position I was in, I was a senior manager in a financial organisation. So the branch managers reported to regional managers, and the regional managers reported to me. So it was quite a senior position, and I thought, you don't just go around saying, well, I've got this, had this vision, and it sounded crazy, but the urgency, this feeling really compelled. It was almost like a drug. It was like a craving that you must do this, you must tell someone, you must do something about it. And all I did was walk into my head office building that morning, having seen this videotape playing in my head in my drive to work. And the first person I just encountered, who was sitting at her desk, and I said to her, do you want to go to the pub at lunchtime? Because I knew I needed to keep it confidential as well, take her out of the building. And she looked at me, kind of startled, because as I said, I wasn't a friend. She reluctantly agreed. And so I confided to her off-site and swore her to secrecy. And because I was still feeling this was odd and strange and not knowing what to do about it, but I did know I had to tell someone. And
like a mission. You had a mission, so to speak, didn't you? And then when you completed it, it stopped. So
it stopped completely, and I thought I had gone. It was almost, I forgot about it. I know that sounds strange, but it was like, oh, it's gone. There's that urgency has gone completely. The visions have gone, and I don't think I expected anything to happen. And of course, sadly, it did.
It did, yeah. Now, that colleague that you spoke to, she must have been thinking, what the hell is this woman asking me to pub for? Is she sacking me or giving me a promotion? What is it?
Yes, that's right, because she was the head of the training and development department. And so in my position, she would be providing me or my branch manager, my branch staff with a service. So you're right. I think she was a bit weary when I said, can we go to the pub and have a chat? I think she was wondering what I was going to say to her or complain about her.
And she would have never have thought that story that you told her would have ever come into the
No,
equation. Yeah.
no,
Very,
no. And
very
as I said,
random.
she then told her boss, who was a board director, and I only found that out when at the point of leaving, that there was
Mm.
that knew what had happened.
So it's one hell of an initiation into the wider world. Tell us where it went from there, because I know it went into this Arthur Conan Doyle direction. What happened next?
Okay, so I'll give you the short version because
Mm-hmm.
a lot you want to fit in. So I mentioned that I had lots of questions, didn't know anything about this, didn't know what I was supposed to do. And again, I don't believe in coincidence. I think things happen for a reason. But at that point, I had chosen to hide myself away in my Glasgow office because I knew I wasn't functioning the way I should have been. And I opened the Glasgow Herald, and there was a double-page spread about Professor Archie Roy, Emeritus Professor of Astronomy at Glasgow University. But the article was about the fact that he had set up this organisation, the Scottish Society for Psychical Research. So I virtually stalked him, and he then recruited me, explained the thing to me, and I said, well, I don't want it to happen again. And he said, oh, it will happen again. And he said, you're obviously sensitive enough to pick these things up, and it will happen again. And that filled me with dread. And then he recruited me to his organisation. And so I learned an awful lot from being in that organisation. But what it didn't do for me was I could listen to the lectures and read all about it. But I felt that if this was something that I was able to receive, then surely I had to figure out how this works so that should it happen again, I would be able to do something about it, or at least utilize it in some more positive way. So I looked for places where I could develop my own psychic or mediumistic or whatever the hell it was ability. So I started doing that, and as is my wont, nothing was happening quickly enough. So I set up my own home circle, and it was in this home circle that, and by that time my mediumship had improved substantially, and I was aware of this man who kept turning up week after week and communicating with me and giving me clues to his identity. And each week, no one in the circle could accept this man. And I kept sending him away. Every week I sent him away because I was thinking, I don't know who this is. And nobody else seemed to know him. And of course, that turned out to be Arthur Conan Doyle. And so it was Arthur Conan Doyle who communicated with me and my group over a 5-year period. And from initially dropping in clues to his identity, he then told us very quickly that we had to find another building in which to sit. Now, that was our instruction. So my small home circle was to find another building in which to sit. And so we started looking for a building, and he started dropping in clues as to what the building would be like. It's in the West End, and it's a townhouse, and it's on a corner site, and it's got multiple floors. And, at one point he said, there's a staircase like Gone with the Wind. And I'm a very logical person. And I was like, well, just tell us, just tell us where the building is and we'll go there, instead of dropping in all these clues. And to my frustration, he said, well, you'll know it when you find it. And he was right. He was right. Through another set of coincidences, I walked into a building with a colleague who was looking for premises for a completely different purpose and didn't know anything about my group whatsoever. And here was the building that we had been told of over a 5-year period. And I turned that into the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle Centre. So that's the short version of the story.
Sure. That's another mission complete. Now, the weird thing is the clues over the 5-year period. Your logical brain, and I have a logical brain as well, would ask, why drip feed it over X amount of time?
Yes.
What has been your answer in your head for that?
Yes, I asked that as well. In fact, it was the frustration came week after week, as I mentioned, dripping in all this information. I'm going, just tell us, and we'll go there. And no. And then once I finally got there, and excuse me, I realized that the building had actually been derelict and empty. It was a bank repossession. It had been repossessed. All the 5 years that we were sitting, being drip fed this information, that building was standing empty, which I only knew once I found the building. And I was like, well, why? Why could we not? Why wait for 5 years and all these clues? Why could we not have been here 5 years ago? And I was told it wasn't ready. It wasn't ready for you. Now, because of what happened subsequently, once we did get into the building, which my second book talks about, which is physical phenomenon, I have questioned that, thinking the building wasn't ready. Now, I know from my own psychical investigations that there's a certain list of criteria that makes certain locations more conducive, let's say, to hauntings, ghosts, paranormal phenomena, whatever. And one of these is an empty building that's been empty for a long period of time. So it's been quiet for a long period of time. And the other point is major refurbishment or DIY activities. So these two things together is a criteria that makes it particularly conducive to, let's just say, psychic phenomenon. So I wondered, when I was told, well, it wasn't ready, did that building have to sit empty for 5 years? And then we came along and did all this major refurbishment. So I don't know, but we did find it eventually.
See, two things came to my mind about this whole it sat empty for 5 years. One is, obviously, in 5 years the price could have come down. That's what I was thinking on a logical side of things. And the second bit was, it wasn't the building that needed to be ready, it was probably you.
I would agree with both of those points, actually. Yes. You're right about the price, because it followed the crash of 2008, the financial crash. And in actual fact, all of the buildings in that street, in that block, were empty. And the banks couldn't sell them because nobody was buying commercial buildings. There's very few people buying residential buildings, but commercial buildings was a complete no-go. So you're right, we were able to buy it then, which we couldn't have done if it was on the open market when everybody was bidding for it. So you're right on that point. I think there's another point about the building being empty for that period of time, and perhaps amassing some sort of, I believe there's some, geo energy that's coming up from the ground in that particular location, and the earth energies in that particular location, as well as actually the architecture of the building, seems to be conducive to creating a vortex of energy that encapsulates it. And I wonder if that's why we had to be in that particular building at that particular time.
And vortex, obviously, being the title.
The name of the second book, yes.
Yes,
right.
yes. So now that all falls into place for me. Amazing. So you're able to communicate with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Now, before we get into some of the things that he may have said to you along the way, can we just give everyone who's listening to this a bit of grounding of who he was in life?
Well, of course, he's most famous as the author of Sherlock Holmes. That's his claim to fame. Well, it's not actually his claim to fame, but that's what he's most famous for. When you look at his life, he had an amazing life. He trained as a doctor, as an ophthalmic surgeon, neither of which he was particularly good at, I have to say. And then he found out he could write stories. And he was a great sportsman. He played cricket and football and golf and skiing. He brought skiing as an international sport. What else has he done? He was a war correspondent. He was a historian. He had an amazing life, an absolutely amazing life. But he was the foremost spokesman on spiritualism and dedicated his life to that aim of getting the message over to people that there was, in fact, life after death.
Yeah, and now this is where it connects, because he, from reading some stuff about him myself, that's part of my research for speaking to yourself, he's like me, and I assume it's exactly like yourself, which is we are 50-50 people. We have highly logical, but we're also open and love the mystery and love all the extra bits out there. He seems along that path. Would you say that's true?
Yes, I would. Yeah, that's right.
I love that. That's another connection. They're not different types of people. We're the same people that tend to group together. Now, one thing from the website, his audio recording, there's an audio recording on the website of yours, the centre, that gives us great insight into him. And I was particularly struck with this phrase that he used. The day a man's mind shuts is the day of his own mental death. I think that's amazing. I don't normally get hung up on quotes, but I really like that quote. Yeah, I think it's so true. So well played him.
Yeah. He also had at one point of his life a bit of an epiphany, and this was when he chose to dedicate the remainder of his life to focusing on spiritualism and travelled the world promoting spiritualism. But at that point, this epiphany that he had, he realized that all of his life up until that point had been what he called an unconscious preparation for what was to come. And that's why I say, when I read that, I thought, that's what happened to me. That's what happened to me, that suddenly I was whisked out of my life to do something completely different. And that I realized, like him, that some of the skills and experience and the life skills that I had amassed during that time was now being utilized for this other purpose. And he found that as well. He realized that he had been made famous. He talked about his small fortune. I don't have a small fortune, but he worked for nothing and I worked for nothing. And so, and his aim was, I've got to get this communication out. I've got to get this message out. And I followed that thinking as well. So, he's a remarkable man. I don't know how anyone could fit all that he did into one lifetime. I reckon he's been here before.
More than likely. Now, that bit you said about preparation, it rings true for me as well, because sure. And if anyone else who's listening to this, if you really question and examine your life, you'll find that all the skill sets you do learn are then channeled into a new path or a new reason at some point in your life. If you really analyze your life, you will see that is the truth, because I know it's happened to me and it's clearly happened to you.
Yes.
So a valid thing. Anyway, I really want to say, go to that website, and there's a link in the description. Go and listen to the recording. It's highly interesting. And as we move on, that part should stick with you. What was his history then with the metaphysical?
Well, I mean, really, he was an investigator. So I think he was interested, I mean, right from very early on, he was interested in mysteries and seances, and he was going to lectures when he was just 18 in Edinburgh about, is there life after death, things like that. So you can see very early on that there's an interest in it. But as that sort of developed, he then became a sort of, or his aim was to be a debunker. I'm going to prove these mediums as frauds, as fakes, or, so he took on that role. And I mean, there's a whole lifetime of history of all the things he was involved in, all the things that he did. But he was very interested in it. He was experienced in it. I'm not sure I would say he was mediumistic himself, but he was certainly experimenting and experimenting, I would say, and he was intrigued. And
Have you?
sorry,
No, sorry, it's my fault. What have you looked into his relation with Houdini and the little tete-a-tete they had? Can you just enlighten us a bit on that?
Yeah, well, yes, they became friends. Houdini, I think Houdini was actually trying to ingratiate himself at one point, because Arthur Conan Doyle was very famous. So was Houdini, but not to the same extent. And so they became friends. And Arthur Conan Doyle, it is said that Arthur Conan Doyle was convinced that what Houdini was doing was dematerializing and rematerializing and things like that. And Houdini was trying to explain that it was a trick. But what happened was, when they were together, Arthur Conan Doyle's wife, this is his second wife, said to Houdini that she would give him a sitting, because both men, Arthur Conan Doyle and Harry Houdini, were very, very close to their mothers. And Harry Houdini desperately wanted to hear from his mother. And Arthur Conan Doyle's wife offered to do a sitting for him. And in doing that, she used automatic writing. And Harry Houdini very patiently and politely listened to her, but then very publicly went to the newspapers and decried them and said that it was nonsense. Now, I'm not sure why he chose to do that, other than perhaps it was too sensitive an issue and they had upset him or whatever, but to go public with his criticism. And it's quite interesting as well when you look at it and from a mediumistic point of view and understanding a bit about the mechanics. Harry Houdini's complaint was that his mother was Hungarian and couldn't speak any English. So how could Arthur Conan Doyle's wife possibly communicate with him? And of course, we know that you don't need to communicate using language, but Harry Houdini obviously didn't know that. And his other complaint was that when Jean was doodling on her automatic writing, she doodled a cross, which was a Christian cross. And of course, his mother was Jewish, so would not have doodled the cross. But from my point of view, I can understand how that would have happened in the communication, So yeah, they fell out publicly.
Yeah, which is a shame, but hey ho, that is what it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So stepping into
the vortex,
so to speak, yeah. Stepping into your communications with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. First off, I want to say why you that he was communicating with, rather than the rest of the people in the circle. I mean, I think we've probably alluded to this, is the fact that you had the skill sets to be the person he needed to arrange the building. What other thoughts have you put on that as to why you?
Yeah, I think that's the main thing that I deduced from it, that I was required to lead the project to get this building, purchase it, refurbish it, and set it up as the Arthur Conan Doyle Centre. However, and the initial communication did come through me mainly, and it still does mainly come through me. But he did communicate with other members of my group as well. So they have all communicated with him too. And I don't suspect for a minute that I'm special or gifted or different or anything like that. And I have given talks in various places at the launch of my first book, Arthur and Me. And one of these places was the Society of Psychical Research in London. And I happened to mention this, saying, look, I don't think I'm special. I think he's going to use any medium, any form of communication that he can to get his message out. And after that talk, there was 3 people came forward from that talk and said, he's communicating with my group, he's communicating with my group. So now I know a lot of people would like to claim that he's communicating with them, but this was the SPR, so there tend to be responsible individuals that don't openly look for that fame.
Yeah, because part of that is reminding me of the whole I was Cleopatra in a real,
Yes.
past life sort of thing where everyone's claiming it. So that it strikes a bit weird somehow, unless the energy is going out to loads of places, like leafleting, so to speak. So you get a bite. Maybe it's that.
That's right.
I don't know.
I think that's right. Yeah. And it's almost like, if we go back to the premonitions again, Professor Archie Roy explained it to me in that he said, we don't know why we get premonitions. And he said, all that I would say is, sensitive people get a glimpse, they get a little window of opportunity and they get this glimpse into something. And lots of people get, different bits of the jigsaw puzzle. And you've just got, more than most. And I think the same is true, just what you've said. I think he is continually trying to get this message over. And there'll be a number of people that will pick it up, not just me and my group.
Like a radio receiver.
Yes, yeah, I think so, yeah.
Right, so what was the first point at which you knew it was him? Did he say he was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, or was it just I wrote this book and I did this, and then you pieced it all together?
Do you know what? It was quite clever at the communication, because if he had turned up in my vision and said, "Hi, I'm Arthur Conan Doyle," no, no, go away. That's rubbish. That's nonsense. But the first time he arrived, and I was just aware of a man in my mediumship. I've got a man here, and I described him. He's a big man, and he's got grey hair, and he's got a grey moustache, and he looks like a grandfather. I described him as he looks like a grandfather to me, because he did. And of course, in mediumship, you're looking for someone to say, well, that could be my grandfather. And then you get another piece of information. And of course, everyone was, looking around going, no, it's nothing to do with me. And so nobody recognized this description, and I sent him away. And then the next week he turned up again, same man again. And this time he let me know that he wasn't a relative of anyone there at all. I wasn't looking for a relative. I had got that bit wrong. And he showed me Surgeons' Hall in Edinburgh. Now, I know now that's where he studied, and he was understudy to Joseph Bell. Joseph Bell is the inspiration for Sherlock Holmes. But he just showed me this building in Edinburgh, which I recognised, Surgeons' Hall. And he let me know he was a doctor. And so I thought, right, I've got that wrong. He's not a relative of any. He just looks like a grandfather to me. I've used my logic instead of my psychic. And he's telling me he's not related to anybody. He's a doctor. And of course, I had 2 people in my group who were involved in the NHS. So I thought, well, he must be a colleague of theirs. And I tried to give him to theirs as a colleague, but they didn't recognize him either. So week after week, so we went from Surgeons' Hall to I'm an author and I've written several books. And they showed me Edinburgh University another week, and they showed me in the library where there'd be all of these books. And each time he gave me a little clue, and I would try and give it to a member of my circle and say, you must recognise this man, he's from Edinburgh University. And they'll go, no. And I kept sending him away. I sent him away week after week after week. I sent him away because nobody recognised him. And one week he said, he showed me King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, and he let me know that the name Arthur was the significant point here. And of course, we were trying to think, well, this is somebody that's written a book. And who wrote King Arthur and the Knights of the Round
Yeah,
Table?
yeah, yeah.
Piece it together. And gave up on that. And then eventually he showed me Sherlock Holmes. And again, coincidentally, I had a librarian as a member of my group. And she wasn't just any librarian, she was the librarian from one of Edinburgh's universities. So she pieced it all together and she was saying, I think it's Arthur Conan Doyle. And she said he worked in Surgeons Hall, he wrote many books. He worked with Joseph Bell. His name's Arthur, and he wrote Sherlock Holmes. And at one point, he had told me, "I'm a knight of the realm." And she said, "I'm just not sure if he was knighted or not. I'm not sure if he was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle or not." Excuse me. So, believe it or not, none of us knew that either. So we all rushed home that night to find out if Arthur Conan Doyle was indeed Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And of course, he was. And of course, my group was all really excited. Oh, we've got Arthur Conan Doyle communicating with us. And although all the clues fitted, I was always still looking for the nugget, the evidence that clinched it for me. And I got that when the Arthur Conan Doyle Centre was open. And he influenced a colleague who knew nothing at all about this to come to me and tell me that the building that had been refurbishing had to be called the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle Centre. He woke up one morning having had this vivid dream, and he had to rush in and find me and tell me that the building had to be called the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle Centre. So that was the clincher for me, that I thought, yeah, okay, you've influenced a third party completely that knows nothing of what's gone before. So I accepted him at face value after that. That was 5 years.
Yeah, 5 years of that. Now, the questions here, and this is naivety on my part, but with the messages that come through, is it all metaphors and images in your mind? Or is it words as well?
I'm predominantly clairvoyant. That's my strongest sense. So they tend to work in pictures with me. So that's why I was getting pictures of Surgeons Hall, pictures of Sherlock Holmes, pictures of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. So I don't generally, or I don't regularly hear the words clairaudiently, but I do sometimes. So I can hear his voice. I can hear his Scottish burr, not all the time, but some of the time. And sometimes that must be more difficult to get that through to me, because it must be easier to get pictures through to me just because of the way my mind works.
Of how you receive, yeah. So here's the question. Here's the two questions I had. As a spirit, or as a person that's passed over, or whatever we want to call it, passed on, is there any ego associated with it, so that when he said to you, "I'm Sir Arthur Conan Doyle," was there any joy? Was there anything wrapped up in it, or was it just facts? This is it. I was this.
At that point, it was just facts. I mean, his words were, and I heard that, his words were, "I was a knight of the realm." That was his actual words. "I was a knight of the realm." Now, that sounds all very grand. And that actually clinched it for me, because by that point, my group were actually feeding back to me and saying, "I think this man's for you, Anne. He's not for us, he's for you." And I was going, "No, I don't know anyone who's been knighted. I don't know a knight." So he said those words, but not with ego, just with, it was the fact, it was the clues. Now, having said all that, working with this man, I get a sense of his personality, and he's not modest at all. he's not a modest man, and he doesn't suffer fools gladly, but he's lovely, and he has a lovely, warm, caring personality.
So that means your personality, as it is, does carry over. Then it's where I was going with that.
I would say so.
So he obviously doesn't have an ego for the fact that, oh, I'm an amazing author because I wrote this amazing book or whatever, or this series of books.
Well, I wouldn't say he doesn't have an ego. All I can say is the sense I get with some of the communication. And when he told me I was a knight of the realm, it wasn't a boastful thing, it was a factual thing. It was a clue to the end result. Now, having said that, he's very aware of his achievements and how famous he was, and the fact that in his life as well, he said this quite openly in his epiphany, that he was using his fame in order to get the message across. So I think that's still the case. He's known. He's one of the most well, let me pull that back again. Sherlock Holmes is one of the most recognised characters worldwide. Arthur Conan Doyle, not so much so, but he is the author of Sherlock Holmes, so it does go hand in hand.
The second question I had was, why didn't he use "I wrote Sherlock Holmes" as one of the earlier clues?
Pass. I don't know the answer.
Yeah, because that was.
I don't know the answer. I think when you read about Arthur Conan Doyle, he didn't like Sherlock Holmes. In fact, there's a hint of him almost being embarrassed by it because he wanted to be known for his historical works. He was knighted for his work in recording the First World War and the Boer War. And these were his serious works, and he wanted to be known for that. And of course, he tries to kill off Sherlock Holmes at one point. And this was the original Bobby Ewing in the shower scenario. Arthur Conan Doyle did it long before Alice. He kills off his famous character because he's had enough of him. And it's his mother that tells him you've got to resurrect him, because he was more popular than anything imaginable. So in terms of saying, I wrote Sherlock Holmes, he didn't see that as one of his main accolades.
Yeah, I can get that, and that makes sense. He's low down his pecking order of priorities about who he is, stroke was. But from a getting a message across perspective to us, that means more than a Knight of the Realm and Arthur, doesn't it? Than I wrote Sherlock Holmes. That's obvious to everyone.
It was the last thing he showed me was Sherlock Holmes. But it was a building up of these clues. And as I mentioned, I think if he had just turned up and said, "Hi, I'm Arthur Conan Doyle, I'm the author of Sherlock Holmes," I wouldn't have believed that. I'd be thinking to myself, "Oh, you've just made that up. That's just nonsense." But the fact that he took me on a journey week after week after week, and me trying, you were talking about logic and, me trying to piece this together, thinking, and I was feeling sorry for this man who kept turning up. And I was thinking, this poor man is trying to give a message to someone here, and I'm failing miserably because I'm clearly not getting his message over. And so, but in doing that, he was very cleverly making me communicate with my group these clues to his identity over several weeks, rather than just turn up and go, ta-da, I'm Arthur Conan Doyle. And in that way, we accepted where he was taking us more so than that. I think we would all have been more skeptical if he just turned up and said, "I'm the author of Sherlock Holmes, I'm Arthur Conan Doyle."
Now, all that makes sense from your perspective and the circle's perspective. Was there any element of frustration that you picked up that the message wasn't getting out of who he was, and when no one's accepting?
No, I think the frustration was with me. I was frustrated. He was just happy to continue coming week after week after week. And I expected each week I expected him not to turn up. Having sent him away thinking, "Oh, well, I don't know who you are, but I'm not getting through here. Go away." I didn't expect him to come the next week, and then the next week, and I thought, "Oh, jings." So the frustration was on my part. He was just quite happily plodding along, just dropping in little breadcrumbs along this trail for us week after week.
Now, he had this agenda then. He wanted to get through to you and he wanted to go, or for yourself, to get this center.
Mm.
Why did he have to wait until his death to have it built rather than during his life? Have you thought about that? Has he told you about that?
Um, there has been. I mean, he had his psychic bookshop in London, and there has been various um, establishments created in his name. So I suspect he's done this a few times. I don't expect. I do. I don't expect this to be unique. I think he's done this a few times, and it is simply him still trying to get his message across.
Wow. So the centre, when was it built, or when was it refurbished? Should we say?
It was opened in 2011. So it was officially opened in 2011. We found it in 2010 and opened in 2011.
And what goes on there? What happens?
Well, it's a spiritual center for the mind, body, spirit. So, there's yoga, Tai Chi, meditation, spiritual development, workshops, mediumship. There's a spiritualist church in the building, and it also houses the Theosophical Society now as well. So, and healing and therapies. So it's a mind, body, spirit center.
Do you do circly sort of stuff there yourself,
Yeah.
or you
Well,
do?
I'm retired now.
Okay.
I'm retired now. I handed over the chairmanship of the centre at the beginning of 2021 to Professor Lance Butler. So he is the chairman now. So I handed over to him really to allow me to write my second book. So I've handed that over and I'm on to the next phase in the mission.
Fair play. Now let's go into your mediumship journey, so to speak, that you went on. Prior to going on this trip from your premonition, had you considered this world? Was it non-existent to you?
No, it wasn't non-existent. I think I would say I was intrigued. I remember when I started working in the bank as an office junior, as the lowest of the low, and the girls were having an office night out, and one of the girls said, "Let's go and see a medium." And I can remember thinking, "Oh no, no, that was the last thing I wanted to go and do," but we did. But I was really, really, really not wanting to go. But we did go, and I was intrigued by it. But
What was the reason why you didn't want to go? Was it fear or something else?
fear, yeah, fear, and also being brought up in with a religious background, and it was it was always a theory that you don't dabble in these things, and it's goes against the church's teaching, and so it was always intrigued, but keep it well away. So yeah.
Sure. Now, another thing I always think of is when a person is training to become a medium, so to speak, what is the line or a threshold where you think that's not my mind coming up with that? That is definitely something coming through. How do you? That's the bit, the grey area there that makes me think. How would I know that in a scenario if I was in?
That's difficult to explain. All I
Mm.
is you just know, you just know that that's not your thoughts. There's something about it that you just think, I didn't imagine that. It's not my thing. It's something that I've received. You just know that it's not yours. It's come from another source.
So is it a knowing rather than identifying that's weird information that I wouldn't think about?
It's a knowing.
It is cool. That word there
Yes.
I've been encountering quite a lot of.
For me, it's a knowing. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay, now so you train to become a medium, and you've done all this stuff with all these circles. What I got a question here. I'm just trying to find it on my sheet. Can you tell me some stories of any readings, stroke experiences that particularly stand out for you across your time doing the circles, other than the Arthur Conan Doyle stuff?
I could tell you lots, but I won't, because simply because that's personal to the individual and it's not for public gratification.
No, that's fair enough then.
I make a point of not talking about the readings that I have done. What I would say is, when we eventually got to the Arthur Conan Doyle Centre, the physical phenomenon that had been promised, sorry, I probably missed that out of some of the description, happened in the building rather than in our group. So sorry, I need to just backtrack a little bit.
No, you carry on.
So when I was talking about my group sitting, and by that time we knew Arthur Conan Doyle was communicating, and he was telling us we were to find this building. But the other thing he told us was that this is going to be a physical group for physical mediumship. So as opposed to the sittings that you were talking about and things like that, which is the normal mediumship, if you want to call it that way, he told us this is going to be a physical group, physical mediumship. And that was the last thing I wanted to do. I thought, oh, no, that's all that weird stuff, no. And we did get, and I thought, well, if that's what you're going to do, you'll have to do it, because I've no idea what to do. And I just sort of disregarded that. I thought, but it's going to happen. It'll just have to happen anyway. And it did. It started happening in our circle. However, we were subsequently told by Arthur Conan Doyle, thus far and no further. I can't take you any further until you find this building. And then the physical phenomenon will happen. And so we then went on the quest to find the building, as I mentioned. And once we found the building, so from my point of view, I was just looking for a building for my group. I wasn't looking for a building for any other purpose. We were just set on this mission to find somewhere for my group to sit. And once we found it, I expected the physical phenomenon to start manifesting in our group, but it actually started just in the building. It was everywhere. It was just, and it was, others in the building that were experiencing it, not simply my group. In fact,
so what happened? What happened? What did you say? What is that?
Well, let me explain first, perhaps, for your listeners, what physical phenomenon is, or physical mediumship is, and the difference with mental mediumship is the thing that most people will recognize, that you see demonstrations of mediumship or one-to-one private sittings. But physical mediumship simply means that something physical happens in the room that everybody can see, or everyone can witness. Now, that can be sounds like voices coming out the air, or things moving, or knocking, or lots of different, but the description of physical mediumship simply means that something physical happens that everyone can witness, not just medium. So that's a description. And as I said, what surprised me was this physical mediumship, or physical phenomenon, happened almost as soon as we got into the building. As soon as we got the keys for the building, the first thing that happened was my husband and I, who were, project managing and doing a lot of the refurbishment ourselves, heard footsteps coming up the stairs, very distinct footsteps. And it has quite a grand staircase in this building. As I mentioned, he told me it was like Gone with the Wind. So it had this very grand staircase, but stone stairs. So, as you hear footsteps scuffing on the floor, very distinctly hearing these footsteps, and there would be no one there. Doors opening, no one there. And then a man appeared, as solid as your eye, just appeared on the stairs to me this day. And I sort of not screamed, but I shouted and jumped with the shock of him actually just materializing on the stairs. And in that moment, our eyes met, and he was able to communicate to me, my house, and I'm watching you. And because I sort of jumped, and my husband came running out and said, what's wrong? And I said, oh, there's a man on the stairs. And he was going, where's the man on the stairs? And I said, oh, it's not a real man. He's like disappeared almost as soon as he materialized. And Ian said, well, who was he? And, what do you think he wanted? And I said, oh, he was letting me know that this is his house. I said, so he's obviously a previous owner, and he's watching us. He's watching us because we're doing this refurbishment. And I said, but he's disappeared. He's gone now. So that man reappeared just before we were due to open. We had done all the refurbishment work, and he reappeared in the same place on the stairs. And this time he was above me. I was on the level below. And so the first time I was looking down at him, he was looking up at me. The second time he was looking down at me, and he appeared again. And he just, I would say, doffed his cap, but he was wearing a top hat, dress coat, waistcoat, cane, very much the Victorian gentleman. And he just sort of signaled like that, as if to say, that's what, I salute you. That's okay.
Yeah, well done.
Yeah, that sort of thing. No words, just the sense of that's okay, because by that time the building had been originally a family home in Victorian times, and so we put it back to its Victorian splendor, and I think he was just acknowledging that. So again, very physical manifestation.
I have two questions about this guy. First thing, when he first materialized to you, was it 0 alpha, as in transparency, right through to then full person, opaqueness, or whatever we want to call it? How long did it take in time to go from nothing to full person? Literally just bang. It was nothing there, and then bang he was.
He just appeared solid, solid as you are. There was nothing translucent about him. I couldn't see through him. There was nothing airy-fairy, etheric. He was solid.
So he wasn't there, and then he was.
Yep. Wow. Yeah.
And what was he wearing that first time? Different from the top hat?
No, same thing. Top hat. So the same garb. A dressed coat. A long coat with waistcoat and a cane. Very, very much the gentleman of the house. And so that was just one of the things. But what happened after that was the physical phenomenon started to be experienced by the workmen. So that was Ian and I in early trying to get organised, that we heard the footsteps and the man appearing. And then, I had painters who their equipment kept disappearing and reappearing somewhere else where it shouldn't be. Their ladders were taken away up. There's 6 floors in this building, and the ground floor and the first floor have very high ceilings, like 4.5 meters high. So very high ceilings with very ornate cornicing. And we had recruited professional painters to paint the cornicing, and they brought in these huge big A-frame ladders and stretched scaffolding planks across them, so that 2 men could stand on them and reach this cornicing that high up. And we came in one day, and they were shouting and swearing at one another because the ladders had disappeared. And we were saying, well, that can't be, that's impossible. And Ian said, somebody must have broken in and stolen them, and I thought, that's a sensible, logical conjecture, And so they disappeared up the stairs looking for where these ladders might, and we went down the stairs because Ian was saying nobody takes ladders out a 6th floor building in the top. They'll have taken them down into the basement and out the back. And of course, when we went down to the basement, we realised that all the windows and doors were barred, metal bars on them all. So there's no way anything could go out of the building. And the painters eventually found them upstairs in this little room that was so tiny with the main function rooms are on the ground on the first floor. And as you go up the stairs, it's attic rooms and servants' quarters. So they're little rooms with low ceilings. And these huge big ladders were stacked lengthwise into this little room, so much so that it took 4 of us to try and maneuver it to get it back out of the room and out of the door. And we took a great big gouge out of the wall because we couldn't get these ladders round the corner to get it out of this room back to where they had been. And that happened like overnight. So there was a lot of things like that happening that I kept losing workmen. They kept...
Were they in that room as well?
They kept refusing to come back.
I don't blame them.
The window guys, there's 42 windows in the building and they all had to be overhauled. And so they had, 6 guys all doing these windows. And a couple of them found me and said, "Oh, there's a man downstairs waiting to see you." I said, "Okay, go downstairs," and nobody there. And this would happen quite a lot. And then they realised that this man wasn't real, that they kept seeing, and there's a little girl that the plasterer saw, and she was playing hide and seek. So it was other people that were witnessing this stuff very early on, long before we were even, it was in the process of being refurbished. We weren't even ready to open. And it was the workmen initially, as a third party, that was witnessing some of this phenomenon.
This ladder stuff, what did you put it down to, or was there ever a resolution as to who moved them?
I think it was just a way of saying it was obviously poltergeist stuff, but it was just a way of saying, "Hey, I'm here, and you wanted physical phenomenon. This is it. This is where it happens. This is." So I don't know who was behind that. And there was various things, like numerous things happened in that building that I've outlined in the Vortex. And in writing that book, I realised that I was struggling coming to a conclusion. What do I say to readers at the end of this as to just what you're asking me? Who or why or what was the purpose of that?
Mm.
And I was thinking, I'm struggling with this myself. What is the purpose of that? And my conjecture and my experience suggests that there is some geomagnetic energies that, well, we know there's earth energies and ley lines in various locations or thin places. The mediums often talk about thin places where that communication takes place. We also know that religious centres like churches and cathedrals and things tend to be located where there's crossed ley lines, because that's where the earth energies are most powerful. So I believe we have that in that location. And the other piece of, I don't know if you call it evidence, but criteria that adds to that is our nearest neighbours, our next door neighbours, is St Mary's Cathedral in Edinburgh, which has the highest spire in Edinburgh. They are right next door to us. And our building is built on the same land. Now, if they built that spire where the earth energies crossed, we're on that same piece of land. Not only that, but we believe there's underground water as well in our building that contributes to that. And the other thing is, I had David Lorimer from the Medical and Scientific Society speaking at Arthur Conan Doyle not so long ago, and he's a supporter as well. One of the other things I did was make sure we had a lecture programme from the academics and the university professors and the scientists and whatnot, to get their conjecture on this. And when he was doing his talk, he turned and looked out the window at the cathedral, and he said, look at that building and look at the spire, and do you realise that buildings like that get struck by lightning hundreds of times during a year? And because they've got the lightning conductor, nobody is aware of it, and sometimes they're more powerful than the others, but they just discharge into the ground. And he said, that's acting like a great big battery. And I thought, yeah, so we've got the cathedral with the highest spire in Edinburgh next door that's getting struck by lightning, that's charging the ground, that has underground water and already has ley lines crossed. And our building is built right on the corner of this site. Now, I think that's part of the reason why it had to be that building that we were to find, because the geomagnetic and the ley lines and the earth energies create a natural energy that can be utilised. And the architecture of the building as well, I could have sent you pictures of our magnificent staircase, but it is a magnificent staircase, and it's a spiral staircase.
Well, send me a picture and I'll put it on screen at this point.
Okay, I'll send you a picture. And so we have this magnificent staircase, spirals up to a glass dome that goes up through the ceiling. And what I was able to sense was that there was this spiral of energy, and I felt I could walk almost like a wall. You could walk in and feel it spiraling, and you could walk back out and you could feel the actual edge of this spiral of energy. Now, I wasn't the one who called it a vortex. I was just able to feel this energy happening. And there was a German couple walked in one day, and the woman had no English at all. And the man came in and just asked directions or something. And she walked towards the reception desk where I was sitting, and I just heard her say, vortex, in this German. I thought, it's that she obviously can feel it as well. So I believe there is this vortex of energy, most of which is naturally created in that particular location. But I believe that energy can then be utilised by various entities, and it can be utilised for good or ill. It's there as an energy to be utilised. Now, I do talk about some of the more sinister aspects of that we encountered in the vortex. But I believe that with our intentions and what we have achieved in the Arthur Conan Doyle Centre over the last 10 or more years, that energy is utilised for good, for our benefit.
And when it's being used for good, does that then become a natural barrier for the bad?
I think so. Yeah.
So this 5-year period, it's like the place was being charged up again, like it had been drained of energies.
Yes, that's right. And what I found as well is, so this vortex of energy that I sense, that I feel, and I felt I could walk into it and walk out of it. I also realised that sometimes it was spinning or more powerful than others, and other times it was barely perceptible. And I thought, now why is this? And I tried to analyse at what times it was more powerful than others. And it was definitely when the building was quiet, it was almost like it powered up. And when it was very busy with lots of people, it was more difficult to perceive. Now, what has the other observation I've had recently is, so that's as I sensed it, this war. And I've got lots of testimony. One thing that I do with my books is I don't expect people just to believe me. I mean, if I read some of this stuff, I would say this woman's off her head. Really, I think that myself sometimes. I think, did this really happen? So I always look for independent corroboration and independent statements, and you'll find that throughout the book as well. I forgot what I was saying now. Um,
Well, I was going to ask a question, so let's see if this
right,
jogs
okay.
something in you, which is to say, this vortex of energy, and this is my theory on it, right? So a person comes in, and when it gets busy, their energy dissipates the flow of the energy that's building up vortex wise, right? And that's probably why it all dissipates. And when the people go, it's back to its normal flow. Just like if you have your fan oven, the chimney above your
Yeah.
cooker on, and it's always doing it in a certain pattern. If a guy walks nearby, then that pattern of air goes to the left or to the right, that sort of thing. So that's my thoughts on that. But my question would be, have you had any scientists come in and see if they could measure it in any way, shape, or form?
No, but I'm working on that now.
Oh, lovely.
Now that I'm retired, I've got time to do some of these things. I'm hoping that that's going to happen quite soon, actually. I've remembered what I was going to say to you about and you're right about, the more people in the building. And I was saying, like, to someone, they seem to dilute it, and then someone else said, well, maybe they absorb it. Well, okay, one thing or another, but well, for whatever reason, or as you say, maybe they deflect it. But the more people, then it disperses somehow. But then, of course, we had lockdown and the building went quiet again. And, I put the staff on furlough as we were allowed to do, and the building was empty and it all went quiet again. And then various things started to happen, like the mirrors in the bathrooms started shattering for no apparent reason. Big plate mirrors that had been just shattered in the middle
That's
of
the stuff of horror movies. You know that, don't you?
well, it's true. And we'd come back and you'd come in and all this shattered mirrored glass was all over the floor, and that would be replaced and then shatter again. So you'll find there's only one mirror left now in the bathrooms because I've just stopped replacing them. And then in the library, a glass door, and this is on CCTV. It just shatters, like 4 o'clock in the morning or something like that. No apparent reason, just glass doors with books behind it, and it just
I
shatters.
wonder if that's the resonance, like either a frequency of sound or something else that's sending a continuous wave at it that breaks it.
Could be, yeah, could be. All I would say is, I notice all these things and think, well, that calmed down for the last 10 years. We did have a lot of that at the beginning, that calmed down, and then suddenly the building's quiet for a couple of years almost, and these strange things start happening again. So it's calmed again because we're back to people coming in the building and whatnot. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the other thing I was saying, you were talking about scientists. I've had various people look at the building and from various angles. One was this underground waterway, and I felt just psychically that there was an underground waterway, but I had nothing to no evidence of that. And then someone sent me an ancient map of the land prior to any buildings being on it at all. And not only is there a waterway, but there's a pump house directly where our building was built. And I'm investigating now whether that pump house was underground or overground. Was it taken away and the building is built, or is it still underground somewhere? And the other thing I found from Historic Scotland's site was that there was an underground tunnel between our building and another building that's like 300 yards away. And when I contacted them and I thought, no, that's interesting as well. There's something going on under this ground. And I contacted them and said, tell me about this underground tunnel and what's your reference? And they couldn't find it. They couldn't find it. They didn't know why they had that as the reference on the website. So I said, just, I'm on the case, just leave it with me. We're trying to figure out what all that's about. I mean, I think the other thing I would say about underground waterways and some of the investigations I've done with that is Edinburgh was known as the brewing capital of the world, certainly in Victorian times. And there was like 55 breweries within old Edinburgh, and Edinburgh is not a huge city, and they all needed wells. They all needed their own wells. And if you look at a map of that, Edinburgh is almost like a colander, that the water, no wonder it's the most haunted place in the world, because water is rising through it's a volcanic city, it's rising through volcanic rock and sandstone, and these minerals and elements were used in brewing. Well, I think they can be utilised for other purposes as well.
Yeah, I've heard that with the waterways and the magnetics and all linking together, and that's where the whole dowsing thing comes in, isn't it?
Yeah.
What is your plans for finding the tunnel?
I'm hoping to get sonic resonance people in. It's quite expensive, and I don't have any money. I'm hoping to convince some of the universities that we've been working with. One thing I would say, I'm always pleased that we seem to attract our fair share of academics and university people working with us, which is great, because I want them to be investigating and I want their theories and whatnot. So I'm hoping that we might be able to utilise some of the university equipment and maybe their funding to help look at this for us. I think the other thing I would say is the foreword to The Vortex was written by Professor Gary Schwartz of the University of Arizona, and he's been brilliant. And I'm also currently working with Dr. Adam Reid of St Andrews University, and he's an anthropologist, but he's very interested in the way as well as to how all this phenomena is happening. So I'm glad to have the universities working with us to try and find some clues as to what this is all about.
And what's going on. Yeah, there's a lot of mysteries there that I would really be interested in finding out about, not only the vortex side of things, the people coming back and how they're physically doing that, and then these tunnels. I'd love to know where that tunnel is and if it's still there and what was it purpose for and all that sort of thing.
Well, you're very welcome. Come and help us.
Yeah, do you know what? If you were local to me, I would, but Edinburgh's not exactly close. I'm Gloucester based, which is quite some way away.
Oh, you're not that far.
Yeah, it's only like 9 hours by car or whatever. I have a question on other physical medium side of things. Have you ever had any apports there? So things appearing.
Oh, yeah.
What have you had? Loads of money?
No, we had some coins, but in both books, in Arthur and Me and Vortex, yes, apports. In Arthur and Me, when it started off, I think the first thing we got was we had in the room that we hired then, we had just a coffee table in front of us, sitting, and we're sitting in a circle. And when we sort of came back from our meditation, it was covered in sort of fibers, like pieces of string, covered in this table. And we thought, that's odd. Where on earth has that come from? Now, the only thing we could put that down to, because it clearly wasn't there when we started out, was there was, the ropes in an old sash and case window that have, the ropes actually in the sash case window. And we can only assume that some of the strings, some of the fibers were pulled out of that and laid on the table for us in front of us. That was one of the first things that happened. Keys, coins, as I said. So, yeah. And then, of course, these ladders and paintbrushes and paint. These were all moved all over the place. And
the coin side of things is always interesting because they're dateable, aren't they? And if you can get, like, say, a Roman coin, they're suddenly not going to appear out of nowhere. Not even anyone who might be there is going to have a Roman coin with them. So have you had anything like that, which are obvious?
No, we haven't had an ancient coin, but one of the coins we had now, I'm just searching my memory banks of where it came from. Uruguay, Puerto Rico, I can't remember exactly, but it wasn't like a euro or a dollar or a cent. It wasn't a coin that would be readily available. And so I have that somewhere. And then that was also a clue to another location that we had to find that was significant in our findings. So like the Baja Peninsula and South American Indians and things like that. So it was like a clue. It served two purposes. It appeared, on the table in front of us, and everything. Well, where did that come from? And then it led on to further investigations.
Oh, like for like side missions you had and things.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Have you ever, as part of your mediumship scenarios, have you ever asked about the apports, like where do they come from, how did they do it, and stuff like that? Have you ever asked that of the spirits?
No, I haven't, and I suppose that's a obvious thing to do. I suppose it's because I've read about it. I know they have to come from some, they have to be moved from here to somewhere else, and I've used my logic rather than my psychic, which is, I suppose, what I fall back on. So when your table's covered in string that wasn't there beforehand, where have they come from? Oh, they've come off these ropes that's on the windows, rather than look for somewhere else.
Well, this is going to sound very weird of me and very brash then when I ask you this question. If you ever get into another mediumship scenario where you're speaking to someone, could you ask the question regarding coins specifically, when they apport them to your coffee table, as an example, say it appears, where has it come from? Has it come from just a discarded coin out in the wild, or are they taking it from somebody?
Yeah, okay. I will, yeah. And the other thing I would say is they're hot.
Are they? Oh, wow.
Yeah, when you pick them up, they're warm, they're, which they shouldn't be just lying on the table, but you pick them up and you find that they're warm.
Well, that tells you something, doesn't it? Either they've interacted with a portal or something that's passed the energy into them. Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah, if you ever find out that, and it's just a side mission, if you ever do it, and then and you ever find the information, could you just email me? Because I'm always interested in the apport side of things. That's amazing. So now let's quickly talk about your books before we move on. What led you to write the books?
Arthur Conan Doyle.
Again, another mission.
He told me I was to write a book about my experience. And that was quite early on as well. And I really didn't want to. I'm the least likely person in the group to write a book. We had a library, as I mentioned, we had a librarian there. We had a journalist there. Why did I have to write the book? And I kept saying, well, are you sure it's me? Can they not write it? Because I didn't want to write it. And no, it had to be you. You had to write it. No, honestly, I didn't want to write a book. But he told me that we had to carefully document. He told us right at the beginning that he was going to teach us. He was going to take us through a series of learning experiences in our psychic and mediumistic development. And he would take us step by step, but we were to record every session and it was to be transcribed because it would be used to write a book at some later stage, and that I was to write it. So I was quite happy to record it and, transcribe all the information, but I didn't want to write a book about it. But I had to. It was part of my mission. So, and of course that book turned into, I'm told it's a trilogy. So I've just finished finished the second one, and I don't really want to write another one. So we'll see. If you sorry.
No, it's my fault again. Yeah, sometimes when I speak, I can't hear you quite, so I have to keep quiet a lot of the times. But knowing that it had to be you to write the book, there's obviously a reason it had to be you. What skills have you picked up since, do you think?
Well, nothing about being an author, writing a book. I don't think. I don't know why it had to be me. I really honestly don't know why it had to be me, because, as I mentioned, it wasn't something I wanted to do. It's not in my skill set. It's not It's just really not something I wanted to do. And I kept thinking there were others more qualified than me. But each time I asked, and asked within the group, I was told, in no uncertain terms, it had to be me. Now, I don't know why, other than, I don't know, it was me who initiated the group. It was me who had the initial conversation with Arthur Conan Doyle. It was me who had the skills to set up the Arthur Conan Doyle Centre. But that doesn't necessarily mean it had to be me that wrote the books. So I don't know. I don't know is the answer to that. I think they've turned out okay.
I'm sure they're more than okay.
But that is about all I can say about it. And the only other thing I would say as well is, just as I mentioned before, Professor Chris Rowe, the president of the Society for Psychical Research, wrote the foreword to the first book, Arthur and Me. Professor Gary Schwartz wrote the foreword to The Vortex. And others, David Lorimer that I've mentioned, Dr. Adam Reid, and others. Now, I look at that and think, isn't it incredible that these people have somehow not only come forward, but offered to help and offered to write these pieces and willingly put their statements into the book? And I literally just marvel at that. I just think, well, there's someone better than me doing this. I'm just the conduit that pulls it all together. I'm literally the medium that is, and I've said this before in the book, that I am used as a tool to do their work.
To get this message out that they exist or whatever.
Yeah, obviously I allow myself to be used, but I still feel part of that compulsion that I spoke about at the beginning about the premonition. But there's a need to get this mission accomplished.
This trilogy.
Yeah. And I had retired, looking forward to travel and relaxation and things like that. And I think eventually it's going to happen sooner or later. But there's another mission on the cards. So
I got two more questions here. One's a personal one, and one's regarding Mr. Arthur. And the first one is regarding Arthur. He sounds like he's a man with a lot of influence or power, because he's setting a lot of people on missions, and he seems to come through strongly and all this sort of stuff. Has anything been said about, are there hierarchies on that side? Where does he sit? Is he really old spirit?
The short answer is I don't know, and nobody does. I recently read a book called The Return of Arthur Conan Doyle, and that was Grace Cook, and it's her husband that actually wrote the book. So she was the medium, the conduit, and he came through to put right some of his earlier protestations about spiritualism and his thinking and whatnot. Now, to me, that was the actual message that came through was unremarkable. I would say it was almost like I could tell that from that he wasn't mediumistic, and then when he's on the other side, he realised how it works, and he had made a mistake. But there was nothing more than that. It was just a nuance, I would say. But he utilised a group in France, an ancient group that were communicating using ciphers and ancient skills from the East. And he came through a convoluted route to get that message through, because he felt compelled to rectify some of his writings that he had done before. Now, I was more intrigued by the route in which he had utilised and these ancient, like the White Knight, and that led to the White Eagle group and things like that. But if you look at some of their ancient methodology and the ciphers and the communications that they had, it's very, very old, ancient techniques and skills, and he was utilizing that to come through. So did he come from that initially? I don't know. I certainly think, if you look logically at all his achievements in his lifetime, I'll send you another picture as well. There's a sketch he did on his deathbed, and it's a horse and cart, and he's basically saying the horse is just about dead now. It's carried this load a long time. And on the cart, he's got all his achievements listed. And it's amazing that one man could achieve so much in one lifetime, unless they had been on previous lifetimes before and brought some of these skills with him, perhaps. But I always, my disclaimer is nobody really knows. We can only just, it's just conjecture.
At this stage, it's always just conjecture. Yeah. I completely agree with you. Now, the other question I had was regarding you on a personal level. You had a life prior, which is in the finance and whatever you did back then versus now. Do you feel more at home now or then?
Oh, yes, definitely. Definitely.
What now?
No, yes. No, you just know you're in the right place, doing the right thing. And when I look back at my banking career, it was a ruthless place to work. It still is, but it was much more ruthless then, and particularly for women. And I survived, and not only survived, but I succeeded in a man's world. And to do that, you have to be fairly ruthless, And I look back at my career and think, how did I survive in that world? How did I tolerate it? And I think when you're on the hamster wheel, you don't stop to think and realize. And so, again, going back to what we said earlier, there had to be something dramatic to stop me in my tracks.
To get you off that hamster wheel.
Wake up, smell the coffee. There's something else going on here.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, when I've looked back on previous jobs that I've had, I look back on them and think, well, they're meaningless. Not in terms of what you learn from them, the friendships you get and all that stuff, but the jobs themselves, like in retail, as an example. You can argue finance and this. Money means zero. It literally is nothing. So that's why now you're doing, I don't know, connection work, more important work, in-depth people work. It just seems better. That's my thoughts.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. But I also don't dismiss the experience that's gone before, just as you quite rightly say. And, going back to Arthur Conan Doyle saying that realizing his life beforehand was an unconscious preparation for what was to come before. I was in banking and finance and building societies, so property, and so those skills were required to buy a building, a 6-story commercial townhouse that had been repossessed at the bank, get finance for it, refurbish it, realize how you would handle a property like that, how you would finance it, how you would project manage it so all of those skills were then utilized in the job that I was deemed to do.
Here's a sly question then on this very thought. This is just another branch that we could go down theoretically wise. Were you fated to do those lessons, to take that job, to learn all those skills, to do what you did now? Or were you one of 20 people doing those skills that were then, you were the one picked? Do you see what I mean? Or was it always meant to be you?
No
I don't
idea.
know how you can answer that, but we can theorize.
Well, I mean, I'm not unique. You're quite right. There's lots of people doing the same sort of job in banks and building societies and properties and whatnot. There's lots of people that do that. I think it was the combination of skills between that and having some sort of innate sensitivity that allowed me to be receptive to that message that, let's face it, most others couldn't receive. So I think it's probably the combination. And you do tend to think that there's not very many people that have that sensitivity. I've changed my thinking on that. I think there's many, many more people have this sixth sense, a natural sixth sense. The difference is most people don't act on it and they don't talk about it. That's the difference. And you have to be strong enough to stand up and be counted and actually do something about it. And that makes the difference.
I agree. I've talked to a number of people on previous interviews I've done, and I've questioned them with this, which is, are we default psychic beings, but most people are turned off, i.e. deactivated, and then like people like yourself become turned on and then can see all the stuff, do all the stuff or whatever. That's what I think. We're all default psychic. We just have been repressed or whatever, suppressed, sorry.
I think that's right. I think often in doing my training and development with students, I regularly tell them that we're all psychic. Every single person is psychic. It is your natural sixth sense. It's just some people have it more developed than others, or put it in your terminology, some have it switched off. And it is there. It's a natural sense. It's your fight or flight response. It's your sense that tells you you're in danger or not, and you can fine tune it and develop it and utilize it. But most people don't.
Yes, completely agree. Okay, so let's move on. We're just about to enter the Koit zone, but before we do, the question I ask everybody, which is, what strange thing or things have happened to you? Now, we can't talk about mediumship stuff because we know generally that's kind of out there already, let's just say. But what other strange things have happened to you? Now, that could be seeing a UFO. It could just be meeting a random weird guy in your life. Can you think of anything?
There's two things I want to say about that.
Go for it.
One thing that I've only just touched on, and this is detailed in the vortex, is I was attacked in that building physically, and I wasn't sure I was going to get out of that building alive that night.
Whoa.
And that happened after my husband had been attacked 3 times beforehand. And I was dismissing his claims and protestations until it happened to me. So if you're talking about a strange thing, that is the most strange thing, weird, scary thing that has ever happened to me. And I've detailed that in the vortex. The other thing, you mentioned the UFOs.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to go off on a completely different tangent, but there is an interesting correlation between people who see UFOs and psychics and mediums. And I'm involved in another group just now, and they're paranormal investigators, but about half of them are ufologists. So they are actively investigating. They're now called UAPs, by the way, instead of UFOs.
Yep.
So they're actively investigating that. Now, for the most part, I listen and learn because it's not my subject. Although I have seen one once, many years ago. So I listen and learn, and I listen to them doing their investigations. And what intrigues me is when you hear about sightings or abductees or other issues with UFOs, the the person having the encounter is having a psychic encounter. Now, they might not describe it as that, but when I look and listen and hear what they're talking about, they talk about receiving this information and they just know. They know to look outside, or they know there's something there, or this thing communicated with them. And I think that's interesting because that's psychic. So whatever it is that's out there is utilizing that same sixth sense that we spoke of earlier, that same psychic communication. And I just find that intriguing.
I completely agree. It is intriguing. I mean, that's a well of, you could spiral down here going on massive tangents with the UFO UAP topic. So we'll leave it there because otherwise it'll be another 2 hour conversation.
Exactly.
And Anne, we are now entering the Koit zone.
Koit Zone!
In the Koit zone, I will ask you random questions. It's all going to be about you and your personality. So, and some of them are just weird and strange. So please bear with. Let's start with, what place have you not been to yet that you want to visit?
Machu Picchu.
And a second, there's always a supplementary question, which is, are you going to walk the entire thing up, or are you going to get the donkeys up, or start halfway, or whatever?
I don't think I'm fit enough to walk all the way up, so I'll find another mode of transport. But I was thinking of the train, actually.
And what is it about Machu Picchu that makes you want to go there?
Well, it's another ancient spiritual site, so I would like to go there. I also want to go to Carcassonne in France as well. So these locations where there is ancient spiritual energy, I would like to go and experience it for myself.
Brilliant. I'm also on the Machu Picchu train, by the way. Not literally on the train. I want to do the walk up, but you know what I mean. I want to go there.
It's on your bucket list.
Correct. If I ever have enough money to go there and time off. Hey ho. What animal do you most resonate with?
Elephants.
My mum loves elephants. What is it about elephants?
I've no idea. I have such a connection with elephants. Not that I have one in my back garden. I don't know what it is. I just have an affinity with elephants. And we were in Sri Lanka a few years ago on holiday and went to the elephant sanctuary. And I had the honour of going into the river and actually getting onto an elephant and scrubbing it in the river. And I felt so connected, absolutely so connected. So I don't know. I just feel elephants are very spiritual as well. They have that sixth sense too, as most animals do. But there's elephants.
Yeah, my girlfriend always says the same about the horses because she's a horse rider and instructor, and so this that connection. She always mentions that word. Yeah. Gravy, does it belong on chips?
No, it doesn't.
Correct, it does not. And second supplementary question, there's always one. When you have gravy on your Sunday roast or midday roast or whenever, week roast, do you have some or is it swimming in gravy?
I have some.
Just some, okay. Fair enough.
Quite a lot, but...
Just not swimming.
Not swimming in it, no.
What was the last thing you microwaved?
Vegetable sprouts.
Oh, aye. When was that, last Christmas?
No, that was last night.
Have you ever walked out of a film at the cinema?
Have I? No, I don't think I have. No, I've wanted to.
But you thought, I'm having my money's worth, damn it.
I live in hope of it getting better. You know, you always think it'll improve, but no, I don't think I've ever walked out. No.
It tells a lot about a person whether you see, you said the key word there, which is hope that it gets better. Yeah. I'm of that persuasion, but my girlfriend would walk out. So
yeah.
I live in hope, right, like you do. Favorite sweets?
Oh, favourite sweets. Chocolate of any description.
You don't care as long as it goes in.
Yeah,
it's chocolatey.
I like Galaxy Ripples.
Galaxy Ripples. Yum, 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 yum. I do like those myself. Left or right-handed?
Right-handed.
Cool. Have you ever stolen anything? And if so, are you brave enough to tell us about it?
Not that I can think of. No, I'm quite an honest person. I don't think I've stolen anything ever.
She's not brave enough to tell.
Yeah, that's right. I don't think I've stolen anything ever. No, nothing I can think of.
Fair enough. Have you ever lost a tooth?
Oh, yes. Yeah. In fact, I nearly lost a tooth working in the Arthur Conan Doyle Centre. And I was described this lovely staircase. And my husband and I did a lot of the work. And I was on the ground level. And my husband was on the first level. And he was leaning over to say something to me. And I looked up, and his mobile phone slipped out his top pocket, came down and hit me in the face and knocked my front tooth out. So yeah, that was the most recent time I lost during the refurbishment.
It didn't slip out, did it? He went, rabbit. Have you ever lost your have you ever lost your car after parking it somewhere? Are you literally forgotten where it is?
Many times, yes. yes. I'm not good at that. Yeah.
I try not to do that. It's one, sometimes I get that in dreams, that one. I don't know why, but yeah, it's a weird one. What's the biggest amount of money you've ever found, coin or note wise?
Found? Oh, £1,000.
You what?
Yeah. When I worked in fact, it might have been 5,000. When I worked in the bank, and I was training to be a cashier, and back in those days, well, there was lots of cash. There's not so much cash around anymore, but there's lots of cash. And once a week, you had to bundle it up into like bricks. You bundled all the money up and banded it up, and it was like bricks. And you put it into a case, and it was collected by the security people and taken back to the head office. And because there was so much cash collectively to be bound up and put into these cases, the accountant would come and check that it was the correct amount so that nobody had nicked anything. And I'll tell you what, it was 4,000 short. It was 4,000 short. And we couldn't find it. And it searched everywhere and we couldn't find it. We couldn't find where this money had gone. And in those days, if that was a problem, you had to call the bank inspectors. No one was allowed out the branch. They came down, they interviewed everybody, they searched everybody, couldn't find it at all. And they gave up at the end of the day, couldn't find this money. And we were eventually allowed to go home. And the next day we went in and the cleaner had put it on my desk, found this under the table, £5,000 in a brick that had gone. So I suppose it wasn't me that found it, but and I think what had happened was it had been counted as 1,000. So the pound notes then were 1,000 and the fivers were 5,000. And it had got into the wrong pile and somehow got back into, underneath the till where it shouldn't have been. And that was,
fair play.
Yeah. I thought good on the cleaner,
Yeah, very honest.
You could have taken it home.
Yeah, nice little bonus. When's the last time you rode a bicycle?
Oh, goodness. When I was at school, probably. I don't cycle. A long, long time ago.
Fair enough, and we'll leave it at that. And that
Thank you.
And that is the end of the Koit Zone before I get slapped via the digital. What else do you like to do in your downtime? Any activities or guilty pleasures?
I'm an unpaid carer for my parents. My parents live with me and they're in their 90s. So that takes a lot of my time caring for them. But I like to walk. I'm right in the hills here. And I know I am in Edinburgh, but I'm right on the outskirts of Edinburgh. And if I look out my window, I look onto the ski slope.
Oh, lovely.
So I like walking. I like walking in the hills. I used to do a lot of dressmaking and floral art. I don't have time for that any longer, but these are some of the things that I'd like to do.
Lovely. And final question. What are you currently working on? And I assume it's going to be the third book, is it?
I'm not I haven't started the third book, although I'm recording some of the things that's happening just now. I'm currently investigating this underground, whatever it is that's under the building, and some connections there to you mentioned ancient Roman times. There may be some connection to Egyptian philosophy and artifacts. So that's just intriguing, and I'm just
very much so.
So I'm doing some investigation into that. My group continues to run, and yeah, that's about it. The mission is to set up another centre. This centre will be in the countryside. So we have one in the town in the West End, and the next centre will be in a countryside retreat. So if that's to happen, they'll have to manifest it. Because again, I'm just the conduit, but that's what I'm told.
Has he given you that mission again?
Yeah.
He doesn't want a lot, does he?
No, that's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I did say at one point I felt used. And I mean that in the sense of the word used. And you do realise at some point, 10 years of my life has gone past. Where did it go? Because I was busy refurbishing a building and setting up the centre, and then you wake up and think 10 years have gone past, and then you think, well, here's you think you've got to the end of it and the book's out and things like, oh, great, I can retire. No, here's the next stage. So I do think we're used or utilised.
Definitely utilised. We are basically tools, are we not?
Yeah.
But then you think those 10 years, at least they've been fulfilling for you. Like we talked about earlier, they had meaning.
That's right.
So we'll leave on that positive, I think.
I also feel that the centre, as well as doing all the things that it does, it's a resource for the community. So I want the whole community to be there, and not just the psychic people or it needs to get out to the general public. And it also needs to be a place of sanctuary and a place where people like me who have these encounters, and it happens all the time, people have these epiphanies, they have these awakenings, and they need somewhere to go, and they need someone to speak to, and someone who's normal, that will listen to them and explain things to them and realize that this is a real thing that happens to a lot of us, most of us.
That is a lovely sentiment to end on. And I will say, Anne, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thanks ever so much for coming on. There's obviously some books Anne has out, so please check the links in the description to this video. Go and check those books out. I'm sure she would appreciate the sales, so go and have a look. And thank you ever so much for coming on, Anne.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
To watch other KoitCast episodes, please click the image top left. To subscribe to my channel, please click the image top right. Please like and share to help KoitCast grow, and most importantly of all, please click the notification bell so you never miss an upload.